Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and in the spirit of the trees and all living things, I want to welcome all of you, wherever you are around the world, to our 422nd session of Humanity Rising, where every day we contemplate issues of gravity pertaining to the human future, taking note as we do of current world events. Over the last week, of course, the eyes of the world have been glued onto the Ukraine as Vladimir Putin and Russian forces invaded a sovereign and free country. We have all over the weekend, I'm sure, been watching the news one way or the other and taking in the complexity of what is now unfolding. We are in now what Clausewitz, the German strategist, called the fog of war. No one's quite sure what is happening. There are rumors that are rife. There are countervailing facts. There's propaganda. There's all kinds of things that are now happening around this event as we all experience the law of unintended consequences. It is fair to say that Vladimir Putin is going to reap a whirlwind out of this. The whole world has been destabilized out of this invasion. And all of us are very rightly concerned about global stability, particularly over the last 24 hours when Vladimir Putin put his nuclear forces onto high alert. We've tried to humanize the conflict as best we can with one of our staff members at Ubiquity University, Katie Tamelchek, who's our graphic designer. The logo of Ubiquity and all of our other logos for our various projects and programs, all one way or another, have been touched by Katie. She has been in the Ukraine and yet, like so many people, has traveled now to Hungary. And she arrived after 60 hours on the road just earlier this morning. So she's a little tired, but Katie, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising once again. The people have really loved your comments over the past days. So I just want to welcome you and have you tell us of your journey, what you're picking up among the people that you're meeting, and your impressions of what's happening there in your home country.
Good afternoon, good evening for everybody. I'm not quite sure what hour is that. As I told Jim like 10 minutes before Humanity Rising, that I'm not quite sure of what to say about the situation. It's very emotional for me. It's not like I'm leaving Ukraine for the first time in my life. I'm actually living in Italy for the last year, and I lived abroad for last 4 years. But I never left my country with this, like mountain in my heart, and not knowing how tomorrow will look like, when I will exactly see my family again. And I'm from the Western Ukraine, so pretty much I cannot say that we are affected by war right now. I mean, we are helping as we can for the front lines. But yesterday we had like sirens over this, over the city for 6 times. That's what my mom told me, because I was on the way. And the worst case that once I left my hometown, which was quite of a small city, I actually faced the reality of this war. I've seen families traveling from very east of Ukraine, like from Kharkiv, which right now in this exact moment is under the air attack. And people on the streets are dying, and those are civils. So I actually met this mother with the child, and this is, I don't know if you can see, but this guy called Makar, and he was traveling with me to the border, to Hungarian border for 5 hours with his mom, and he is 3 years old. He probably doesn't really understand what's happening in the country, and his mom keeps saying like, this is an adventure. And I don't know, this is really an adventure for whole Ukraine. I also seen families like traveling from Sumy, which is like almost in the border, in the eastern border with Russia. So they basically crossed Ukraine over last 4 days. By the way, the father of this family was American. You know, like, so I didn't really, you know, like I was holding myself not to cry and sitting in front of this child for 5 hours and realizing, you know, like they probably will be not able to come back to their homes because their homes can be bombed any moment. And the war is very unfair, and killing civil people, and it's already like around 20 children got affected and got killed in Kiev and on the eastern Ukraine. And I don't know, it's terrifying. I'm not even saying about the nuclear weapon that got like activated by Putin. The whole situation is very dramatic. I also could not see actually people on the border, let's say, getting the status of refugee. I would never imagine in my life that any Ukrainian ever will actually, you know, like get this status. So this is I don't know how to explain, but it's really painful. That's all I can say. I mean, like, we are very strong. We are still fighting. We are now negotiating with Russia, and we actually claim Crimea and all the eastern regions to be freed from their armed forces, as it was before the invasion in 2014. And the whole world is really fighting with us. I'm really grateful for all the support, for donations, for people on the street shouting across Europe and many other countries for Ukraine. We are really fighting, but despite this and the spirit that probably they will never be able to break, it's really painful right now just to survive it. No matter are you in Kiev, in underground, under bombarding, or you're just, you know, like in the safe place, it still hurts so much. Thank you.
And Katie, just a quick follow-up question. You know, as you were traveling around Ukraine, what was your sense of the fortitude of the people? Are people completely united, or a lot of them
Invincible,
demoralized and confused and seeking to leave? Are people disciplined? Is there social order? Has there been a breakup of the social order as you've experienced it? How would you describe the social cohesion right now in the Ukraine?
Overall, I never experienced this unity of the nation ever before that we have right now, because, you know, they were like for years they were trying to break us to Ukrainian speaking people living on the west and Russian speaking people living on the east, and it was always, you know, like something to separate us. But right now it's like, Jim, like, this nation does unbelievable things like everywhere where people can stand, they stand even next to the Russian tank trying to stop it. They jump on it, you know, like they do everything possible. Plus, on top of that, I'm really proud of humor that we have over this, like in these times, you know, like there are many jokes, many memes. We're actually changing the road signs saying, go back to Russia. Oh, you're lost, still go back to Russia. You know, like, so they're like, people really do that. People really making a lot of I would not say fun, but it's like, you know, like fun through the tears. But this is really helping us to stay even stronger, because we know the truth, and that's what we're fighting for, you know. And every time Putin does the speech saying the completely insane, unrealistic things, it gets back to being to be memes, you know, and it gets spread to the world. And I'm really, over the last years, as I said, I lived in many different countries, and I have like quite a big international community, and I really receive a huge support both from Ubiquity that I'm working right now, and both from, you know, like just friends and people I ever met, like maybe met once in my life. Right now, I have a friend of the friend who is hosting me in Hungary, and I never really met in person this girl, but you know, like through connections. And it's another two Ukrainian girls here, one from Kharkiv and one from Kiev. And the girl who is hosting us is Tunisian. So you know, like it's really a huge solidarity worldwide. And I'm talking about the spirit. Of course, there is the panic. Of course, there is the fear. But it's not like people do not show. You know, I seen families who actually lost their home during this trip, but haven't seen any tears. I haven't seen any. You know, um, they were not desperate, they were not sad, they were like organized on a trip, taking care about their children, you know, saying like this is just an adventure, you know, and all of that, trying to really be positive over everything what's happening. Obviously on the border there are queues, you know. I really got lucky to get to the Hungarian border. Honestly, I didn't care. I mean, like I just needed to cross their border. But people on the Polish border, they stay in the queues, in the live queues for 3 days. So it's really tough, you know, the situation. And obviously people, you know, like people are scared, and there are many internationals who are still leaving the country, and it's a bit messy, you know, but everything is messy because we are under the war. But the trains are still coming, the buses are still coming, volunteers are still here. So it's, you know, I cannot say it's ideal, but it's still working, and people still get their, you know, like their opportunity to leave if they need to leave. Obviously no man can leave, so it's only women with children and international, like, and man who has the foreign passport. For the rest, they stay. But I would say like that in Kiev, it's already 35,000 like guys who volunteer to protect the city. So I don't know, like in my, at least in my close contacts, I don't know any guy who actually left out from Ukraine. And they, like, in contrary, my classmates, they came back to our home city and joined the I don't know how to call it, but they are not really armed forces, but they join to protect the city. So now they are getting trained to do that. And it's three of my classmates from 18 people who were in the class. So I'm really proud of them. And my classmates were dropping me to the train station over the night, and my city was just completely without the light, because this is like the what they do to, let's say, to hide the objects from aviation over the night, so it's not so visible. And so he told me, you know, Kate, I know myself, and I will fight till the end. And I know in Ukraine there are many like I am. And that made make me, you know, like to leave my hometown kind of like in a more comfortable mood with all of that. And I really know there are a lot of them, and it's they you know, like people fight everywhere, people do miracles, honestly, right now in my country. The level of heroism is I'm very proud. That's it.
Thank you, Katie. We're very proud of you. And I think the whole world is watching the Ukrainians hold off the Russians. I think the Russians thought it would be much easier, but the weekend, Kiev is still strong and intact, and Kharkov and other cities. So the Ukrainians are standing very strong, and with the complete solidarity of most of the rest of the world. So we wish you all the best, safe travels. Maybe you can come back on tomorrow or whenever you would like to share whatever is going on, because I'm sure you're staying in touch with people back in the Ukraine. But we'll continue to monitor this on a daily basis with complete solidarity and support for the sovereign, free nation of Ukraine. So thank you. Thank you,
And
Katie,
also,
so much.
I want to say last sentence that I left my country because I believe I will be more useful here. I know there are many people who actually get gathering like everything what Ukraine needs right now all over the Europe, and I'm joining kind of my I don't know, my mission here, you know. So we'll do. It's not only people inside, but there are many Ukrainians outside, and we all stand as one. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Standing as one, everyone. That's the bottom line in this moment. And in that spirit, let's just pause and go into our hearts just for a minute and surround Katie, Tomolchek, and all the brave Ukrainians who are resisting the invasion, sending them all our love and strength and goodwill. Thank you, everyone. You know, as you just think about the world right now, we're in multiple code reds. While we're taking in the invasion of Ukraine, the United Nations released reports that climate change is spinning more and more out of control, and there's deepening concern that people and governments cannot adapt fast enough to the escalating turbulence. We're also dealing with the assault on democracy in various countries around the world. We're just seeing it in Ukraine, a sovereign and free people. We're witnessing it here in the United States, where the Republican Party, Donald Trump, is coming out in support of Putin and somehow blaming President Biden for the invasion of Ukraine. There's craziness, there's madness afoot. And somehow or other, we have to keep our inner coherence. That's why we wanted to surround Katie with love and strength today and every day, and focus our attention on the valiance of the Ukrainian people. But all of us are under assault of some kind. And it's escalating. And it's coming from multiple sectors: climate, politics, geostrategic relations, COVID. And our singular challenge is to somehow build the internal resilience, the internal emotional equilibrium, coherence that can enable us to both understand what's happening as best we can in a world full of false news, but also navigate through in a way that allows us to prosper and to thrive. And that's one reason why at the beginning of this year, as 2022 was underway, I said multiple times the meta thematic of Humanity Rising as we move into the future is how do we build up our inner regeneration? How do we build up our interior strength and fortitude? So a number of our programs have been on that theme. And today we want to turn to this theme of dynamic growth and how we understand what we know and how we build through emotional intelligence and sound and music, healing capacities for our very beings, not only our body, but our minds and our souls, our hearts. So I want to welcome to the program Claire Hayden, who is a healer and sound practitioner who has a very specific protocol, I would say, and program around what she calls dynamic emergence. That's what we all need to do right now, wherever we are in the world. So Claire, thank you for your willingness to share what you know and what you're deepening your experience into on Humanity Rising. I'll turn the program over to you. And then when Claire is finished with her presentation, I'll circle back and we'll have a dialogue bringing in whatever those of you who are on the Zoom call want to put into the chat. So thank you, everyone, for honoring Katie and the Ukrainians today. And Claire, now tell us about dynamic emergence.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Katie. My heart goes out to you. By way of introduction, sometimes I talk a lot and fast, and then sometimes I go very quiet. And in either case, there is something happening. And I say that in case there are moments where I need to just kind of reflect before saying something else. I am still with you. There is a beauty that I find in myself when I am sometimes hurting. As my attention seeks solace, I stare at atoms and see light. I imagine horrors and feel the grief of connection. I am reminded that connection is beauty. Beauty and connection make me one with you. There is no separation in the beauty. Even the flowers bow to the light. So how do I hold the grief of others that I cannot touch with urgent fingers? How do I let them know that I love them too? What is it in us that fights to be free and yet enslaves others in the process? Why do we imagine by being small enough to inflict pain that we can become big enough to rule the world? Why do we imagine that by being small enough to inflict pain, we can become big enough to rule the world? Why would we want to? Why? Even the flowers bow to the light. My sight holds you. My heart enfolds and carries you. I sob fierce rivers as my life recognizes yours. I apologize on behalf of the smallness. I apologize on behalf of the smallness that seeks to diminish the bigness of our cosmologically connected worlds. We can do better. We can do better. And we simply cannot shine without your light, to which even the flowers bow.
Claire, original sound.
There is the sound, and then there is the silence, which is not empty. It is full of what the sound carried into the field. When I woke this morning, I felt it. I felt the energy of today, and I felt the energy of Ukraine, all the individual people, the animals, the landscapes, the wilderness, the culture, the thread. We are, as a species, definitely on a journey. Part of what I bring to that is something that I was really a relationship to my entire life, trying to understand things, trying to understand humans, almost as if I wasn't one, but really because I was and am, and I am as vulnerable to the next person as suffering. And I wanted to understand it, I think in part because I am a healer, I am an artist, I have an academic element. So in a way, I can kind of see things and feel things from many different vantage points. It's a lot of information. And I wanted to organize it in a way. At the heart of things, even though I'm a healer, I show up through teaching and I show up through sound. I just show up, really, however I can in any given moment, feeling into what might be most appropriate as a way to connect and respect that which is and that which seeks to be. I sort of collaborated on creating dynamic emergence because it was in part a heuristic study of my entire life. And then there was this academic background and so many people that we stand on the shoulders of that inform our ability to perceive and to experience sensation, articulate that in different ways. I am going to share my screen, but I hope it does not create a barrier between the immediacy that is available in this moment. We will see. I was deciding even just last night, what picture could encapsulate dynamic emergence in a way that feels relevant today? And it was this. The most recent gathering I had with some very, very dear friends, including earth warriors like Marc Dubois, Claire Dubois from Tree Sisters, someone who works in the field of psychology, trying to help people orient themselves, this chaos of being human. And we had a gathering, and the love that is there is really what this is about. All of this that is occurring. And so I'm considering everything really, the situation, as I say down here, from the perspective of energy, values, and meaning. Because at the core of all of it is this very unbiased energy that travels through our impulses that we generate. And in a way, the battle is energetic. I already just did this, but I'll have to pass through it. I'm going to let this be something that you could consider using on an occasion. Problems exist, and we have this idea sometimes that they are a fixed element, just like we have an idea that we are a fixed element, and that's not accurate. We are in motion, and therefore so is a problem. In the future, you might choose to re-listen to what I just sang, having a problem in the front of your mind or in your heart, writing it down so that you don't have to carry it through the listening, and then letting it go and experiencing that, because the point of it really is to notice what happens next. And you can ask yourself these questions. How is the problem to me now? What is my relationship to it? Is the problem the same as it was 5 minutes ago? Am I the same as I was 5 minutes ago? If either one of those has changed, it's all changed. There are two tenets to dynamic emergence. In other words, two things that seem to be true. We changed with sound, just like we changed with poetry. This exists in our life in a very tangible, usable, useful way. Sound, anything, meditation, walking meditation, prayer, any kind of action. The thing I want to point out today, one of the most important things I think around this idea of not being fixed, is that we do in fact become actually different people around different people and in different environments. So there's an advantage to knowing that. The other tenet is that energy waits to be noticed, which might sound anthropomorphic, but it's actually just an apparent experiential truth. We have a thing as humans with this first bullet point, this idea that if something looks empty, it must be empty. If something sounds quiet, it must be empty. We have trouble holding the reality of fullness as a constant. Bearing in mind, of course, beginner's mind. So there are times we have to tip our mind out to let stuff in. I guess, in other words, we have to stop being stubborn. Paying attention to the energy of something allows it to travel into our world. And I'm going to show you an example of that through paintings in a minute. It needs to be noticed in order to be activated, which is why we empathize, which is why we use nonviolent communication, which is why we apologize, which is why we meditate, which is why we tend to cuts and broken bones. Energy waits to be noticed. We are, in the noticing, bringing the implicate into the explicate, David Bohm's terminology. So everything waits to emerge like seeds. And then with the noticing, there's a certain form of attention and tending, and then it can arise. It does that by traveling across a liminal threshold, which is a very real thing. That liminal threshold, in a way, is where we have to surrender our egos, our expectations, our assumptions, our stubbornness. And that kind of makes everything permeable. And then things can travel between us and the implicate, us and the not yet known. I'm wondering whether to play this right now. I think I am actually going to. It's a video. I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen a particular way so I can share it a different way. One second. I went traveling in the wilderness in Scotland a few years ago, shortly before COVID started. And this is what I came across. And I want to check, I actually did select computer sound. Yes, I did. So please take this in as a whole body, as a whole being, and just experience it. And again, notice how you feel without being too mentally analytical about it. No need to interpret. I am the mountain. I am the mountain, and you are the breeze. I am the whole forest, and you are the trees. When we were born, we knew things. When we were born, we knew things. Connection was our start point. My beauty is inherited from everything around me, and it's generated from everything inside of me. I move like a silky on the night sea in order to reach home over and over. An endless journey with multiple stop points. The place between sea and sky is my home. The place between sea and sky is my home. As I disembark on this journey, I gain new wisdom, remember old knowledge, seed new relationships, and weave new life through my bones, and the voice of my body. This body has known things since before my time. This body has known things since before my time. This soul is the water. This soul is the land. This soul is the wind. It is the wind. And the mountains open up. This soul feels the cracks. It feels the cracks and knows it is time to come home. Hang on. So let's just be with that for a moment, that spaciousness, that reminder of ourselves as earth, as nature. We're not just part of it. We can't, not be a part of it, because we are it. We're an essential element, as is any other aspect of life, aliveness. So the question, who am I? And this is a question we can always ask ourselves any moment of any day. Who am I? So this is my version of that in this moment. I'm a listener. I feel my listening. I am an artist. My definition of an artist is someone who chooses, who cannot help but dance with reality. I'm a healer. I suspect many people who are here today can relate to this, who identify in these ways. I am a magical being. I connect to magic. And the root, by the way, of magic is magi. And if you look that up, its etymology, or even just in the dictionary, magic, there are other words for it: sorcerer, astronomer, and alchemist. And Samara, I have another friend who is similar to me in this fashion. Samara are those little seeds that travel in the wind. Might be dandelions, it could be, I think they're called chestnut, I forget their actual name, but they pollinate as they travel. I am the wind. I am the wind. I am the forest. I am the ocean. I am the mountains. I am anticipatory presence. I wait to notice things. I seek connection. And I am we. I am us. Your images may look very different, but they will have their beauty and their rawness. So this is where I want to talk a little, and we're moving towards this conversation on coherence that Jim introduced. Songwriting, improvising, and energy balls. So these are some of the beginnings of paintings that I started doing as another way of listening at the threshold, listening at the edges of liminal space. Listening for connection, listening for communication and information. So these energy balls are kind of a gestalt. They are paintings that I started doing. We'll probably talk about them when I chat with Jim a little bit later. But they are in essence something that is moving and alive, and it is very much yet another way for the implicate to become explicate. This idea that life is waiting for us to notice it. However we show up, whatever tools we use, life is waiting for us to dance with it, to be the artist, and to represent its complexity in ways that come through us uniquely. When we are true to that, in other words, when the mechanics of the skill set are good, we can get out of the way so that the actual energy and information can come through cleanly, clearly, articulately. So these are some examples. I just want to let you sit with them for a moment. I intuitively pick the colors. I have many. And I let the motion of the brush stroke guide everything. And I try and keep out of the way. I noticed a lot of these energy balls actually seem to have an eye in the middle. And years ago, when I was a singer-songwriter performing, you know, in cafes and clubs, there was a song I wrote that said, you sit at a table in a room with a view, and as you stare out the window, your life looks back at you. Did anyone ever tell you that your life would look back at you? What are you going to do? I feel the wind, the leaves, I can hear them. So to reiterate, and I'm just speaking up as I am, because I didn't have that growing up. I didn't see people speaking as they are, loving themselves as they are. So I was confused. I didn't understand who I was. I didn't understand my impulses. I didn't understand creativity. I was wildly rebellious. I was so angry. But here, when I moved to San Francisco in my early 20s from England, I got involved. You know, I went to art school. I facilitated Birmingham dialogues. I discovered so many different listening practices. And I learned to feel and trust what I could feel. We have multiple ways of knowing, and they're not all fully represented. This one is, but it's actually not, and I'll tell you why as we go along. So we have our rational way of knowing, we have our emotional way of knowing, we have our sensory way of knowing, picking up subtle energies. And of course, we have our intuition, and most importantly, all of this resides inside of not knowing. And they collaborate. They collaborate together. They talk to each other. And when they don't, difficult things happen, which is where we are today. Each way of knowing has its own language. And by the way, there are 7 courses for dynamic emergence, which is what I'm describing here. And we go into this more deeply, more personally. So the rational, obviously, I think, the emotional, I feel, and the sensory, I sense. I can feel the technology of energy. These feed our imagination in unique ways for each of us. That's how we get a personality. And they both influence our way of being, and our way of being also influences which of these ways of knowing is most apparent and available to us. And is it rigid, or is there a fluidity? We have a thing called a knowing bias. And this might be kind of a general way of being, but it's also something that could be a bit fixed, which is where we go back to the first tenet, that nothing is fixed. So if we're very articulate with our rational knowing, we might not be as good with the other two, the sensory and the emotional. And obviously that could be true with being strongly emotional and strongly sensory. Learning how, as communities, to have conversations between us that know how to understand what it's like to be the sensory biased person, the emotionally biased person, the rationally biased person. These are important things for empathy and also for our curiosity. The thing that I want to say right now, while it's on my mind about rational, is that what we have done with it as sort of an industrialized society is we have sectioned off really logic and prioritized it. We've made it into a golden throne of sort of reverence, and we think that it can take us out of trouble. And it can, if it's in sympathetic relationship with the emotional and the sensory. As it is, the rational is bereft of reverie, imagination, dreaming, daydreaming, night dreaming. There are so many ways that we can appreciate the sensitivity of our aliveness, our collective aliveness, If the rational is more informed by the emotional and the sensory, then it can truly know itself. But it has been orphaned. This is the main basic map for dynamic emergence. What we're trying to do here is recognize our embeddedness. So here are these ways of knowing, sitting inside the intuition and the not knowing. And I'm not going to go deeply into these right now, but I want to just name them. So rational, emotional, sensory, we tend to refer to that as res, rational, emotional, sensory, and then resi if we include the intuitive. Yeah. So that's the inner res. That's what's happening in here. And unless I'm being invaded, and that does happen a lot, that's why we need to have these conversations, because there's a lot of psychic invasion that goes on, a lot of presumptions in public and even in the way we grow up. But technically speaking, this should really just be my space. And as I'm very little, I'll have guardians and whatnot. They'll be informing this space, helping me grow in the ideal world, right? But it's not always ideal. So this is where a lot of confusion around identity can become embedded in our sense of the world, in what we see when we look outwards. This yellow band is called the outer res. This is the interactive zone, the transactional zone, where we go shopping, get on the bus, get on, do whatever we do, and we communicate, but we're not being very revealing. But the truth is, even though we're not being very revealing, all of this stuff is in there anyway, infecting, influencing, affecting what is going on in the interaction, what we're expecting. These are all the belief systems. They get designed here by us. The creative collective, all of these levels create a creative field. So it's called the creative collective or creative consciousness. And that breathes. I'll show you something in a second to illustrate that, but it breathes with our own sense of limitation and possibilities, like that movement between the two areas of reference. All of this, of course, would not be here without our planet. There is planetary intelligence, sentience, consciousness. The more we can sink into the sensory, the more relationship we can have with that way of knowing and being, like indigenous cultures and people do. And then this all lives inside the cosmos. So this is an infinite consciousness, cosmological consciousness, whatever you like to call it. If you're very religious, you might call this God. So the fields of influence, I promised that I would talk about this today. And it's something that we live with all the time, literally all the time. So you could see, just imagine that this is a representation of one person and here's another person, and they're having a transaction. They're in this transactional zone. And just looking at these arrows, we're calling that our control position. So it's kind of neutral, it's fine. It's not super inspiring, but it's also not negating. It's not life negating. Here, something happened and they've had an incredible discovery or some kind of realization or some kind of generosity has occurred. So this is called the positive feedback loop because it is expanding, and with that is everything that it's embedded in can expand too, especially our creativity. So that's a positive feedback loop. This is called negative, not because it is negative qualitatively, but simply because it's neutral. It maintains itself. And then here it's going back in again because maybe someone offended someone got triggered, all these things, which is why self-awareness is so essential, because it means that we can control this kind of breathing that happens. So I call that the inverse positive because it's reducing the possibilities. And then in a group situation, here you've got the collective consciousness. So in this group situation, you can see the same thing is occurring. So whatever's occurring on the smallest possible scale is occurring in multiple scales simultaneously. Here, something good was happening. Maybe this was a team meeting at Ubiquity University and they've had a new idea and they're excited. Or someone came and gave a presentation and there was a great response. So there's this field, people, all of us who are participating today. And then here it reduces. So again, maybe someone got triggered, maybe someone did not know how to listen to someone else in the meeting, Maybe something that was waiting to be noticed didn't get noticed, and so the possibilities shrank a little. But these are literally second by second by second. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is fixed. We can influence this. The cost of disenfranchisement, which is what has occurred by focusing only on the rational and trying to disenfranchise the emotional and the sensory, you know, and we've seen it over and over and over how this has happened. A way to measure that I find interesting, if you ever want to try this with people, is ask a group of people, where does their body end? Ask them to indicate where their body ends. There's a pretty good chance that they might indicate that it ends here at the edge of their physicality as they can see it and feel it. But this is called colonial body versus indigenous body. The indigenous body doesn't end here. It doesn't even end in the forest. It doesn't end really anywhere, because it's the breathing collective. It is connected to all the animals, to the forests, to the land, to the air. There is an embedded, inherent, natural understanding of belonging, where we here have, in westernized capitalist, mechanistic society, reductionistic society, have isolated ourselves to the point that we believe that competition is really our only route to survival. And of course, that is not sustainable, it's not accurate. There's this thing called inversion theory that I've came across when I was sort of co-creating dynamic emergence as something for others to participate in. When one way of knowing gets isolated and overemphasized and it's not informed by the other two, then we get in trouble. It becomes the inverse of itself. That is the potential, and that is where we are today. So the inverse of rational knowing is, of course, irrational. The question being, why would an intelligent, creative species choose behaviors repeatedly that cause suffering and could end their collective lives? Why would we do that? We're intelligent, but that doesn't seem to be intelligent. So if the rational is not in sympathetic relationship with the emotional and the sensory, it will become arrogant, it will become cold, it will disdain the holistic life. And we hear this a lot. People who work in holistic fields, this term woo-woo, we'll even use it ourselves. Oh, I hope this isn't too woo-woo. And it's like, when did that become acceptable? So the inverse of emotional knowing, of course, we saw this with Trump. He was a wonderful example of what happens when you're disconnected emotionally. So he became vindictive, hurtful on purpose. It leads all the way to psychopathy or genocide. The inverse of the sensory knowing is becoming insensitive. That can lead to things like addiction, abuse, rape, violence, and ecocide. So knowing how we know, knowing how to be in relationship to that with humility is actually really key. I'm not going to talk about this because it's too much information, but I'm going to point to it. It's one of the maps you'll get if you ever wanted to study dynamic emergence. So it's a BAP map, business, advertising, and politics. And because we have these ways of knowing, and we don't necessarily know ourselves super well as a species in terms of by design, how are we designed? What are we meant to be capable of doing? What are we meant to be doing in terms of this multidimensional realities that we are part of, implicitly part of? So we become vulnerable. We become vulnerable to marketing talk. And I can share this slide later. We become vulnerable to marketing talk through emotional language, through rational language, and through sensory language, where again, the focus is on personal gain, personal protection, including the nucleus family, if you have one. So I'm just going to throw these out here for perhaps a conversation another day, but these are such key words for me. They help me travel. They help me travel into the more numinous realms, which we can see right here. Words are extraordinary. I've always loved words. They give us clues about our journey, the journey we're currently on. The numinous is where I go when I'm creating. It's where any of us go when we're having sacred time with somebody or with something. It is not necessarily a physical place, but it might be. The liminal is that threshold that we've mentioned, that we have to travel through to get there. We have to adjust ourselves in order to be able to enter and commune with that zone. Temenos is in fact a sacred cave. It's a physical place and might just be a piece of land. It doesn't have to be a cave. But it's something that, I don't know when this began as a tradition, but the king, this is kind of a British thing, would name a place, a small area in his land, and he'd say, you know, this is mine, this is the Temenos. And it was sort of held in that way. We're going to come to this again. Sehnsucht and Fernweh, I think these, and I'd love to talk with Jim about this, and all of you, I think these are what is happening to us as humans, and it is not named. And when things are not named, tenet number 2, energy waits to be noticed, they run amok because they don't know how to manage themselves. That's our job, is to manage them. If we don't know they're there, we can't manage them. So Fernweh is this idea of longing, a longing for emergence, a longing to travel. It's this thing that makes us gaze out of windows and feel a longing to be somewhere that we may never have been. It may also be a link to an ancestral line, by the way, that Fernweh. And then Sehnsucht, another Germanic word, is this longing for something better, as if like the grass is greener, that kind of longing. But it's also a feeling of incompleteness. I think we have these two longings and we confuse stealing other people's happiness with filling these gaps, these holes in ourselves, in our lives. We don't know how to do it for ourselves. And if we don't know how to do it for ourselves, and we see someone else, such as an indigenous people that are living in harmony, I'm not idealizing or deifying, but I am acknowledging that they have a sustainable lifestyle when they're not interrupted by westernized society. That this is part of what's going. It's an unnamed, unknown impulse for healing and restoration in the worst possible way. So the sacred space and self-awareness awaits in the silence between the words and actions. So again, these three are really good to know because they'll help us travel to places of belonging within ourselves as part of the community of the universe. You are a place, right? You are a nation. You are also a journey. You're not just on a journey, you are a journey, and you travel. And when you look at the word imagination, I've already mentioned this with reference to alchemy. When you use your capacity to alchemize, you change realities. Whether you're changing this nation, becoming self-aware, whether you're changing external nations of which you are a part. So using our imagination, the thing we were encouraged to step away from because we were growing up, becoming adults, is in fact the most important vehicle we have for connecting to the numinous, the liminal, and so on. And let's remember this, you yourself are a temenos. You are that sacred place. Everything happens right here at home. This is my final screen. I invite you to take a screenshot. And I will post these. There are things to let you know about. And I'm thinking, I look like my picture down there. I'm thinking that maybe I'll share the most important upcoming things in the chat or in the after chat. But one thing two or three things I'll mention first. There is a new dynamic emergence cohort starting, and it's on the 12th of March. There is an introduction on that should say the 5th of March, not the 3rd. But we'll post these informations. And I have a dynamic emergence group actually in the Ubiquity community. If you're local to the San Francisco Bay Area, I will be playing an extraordinary concert with Mark Deutsch, who is extraordinarily talented. He designed his own musical instrument, which was combining an upright bass with a sitar, and he knows so much about the cosmology of music. So we're going to perform, take people on a journey, and we'll have conversation afterwards. I have a newsletter that happens to be going out tomorrow. It goes out on Tuesdays. If you subscribe before it goes out about 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Tuesday, tomorrow, you will receive that, and a lot of this information will be in there. And my email is down here, and I have a new CD coming out, which I'm very excited about. It's called Singing the World to Peace, and it's very much related to what's happening in Ukraine. So with that, I'm stopping my screen share. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here with me and with all of us today. Thank you, Jim, for inviting me. Thank you to Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising for the incredible work that you're doing to bring us together so that we can notice each other. Namaste.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for your music. Thank you for your heartfulness. Thank you for your inspiration on the nature of dynamic emergence. There's a lot to talk about. We only have a few minutes left, but I want to start with a question that Deanna Rice has posed about what you consider to be the most potent influence energetically to move from the implicate to the explicate in our individual and collective lives. Of all the things that you've itemized between the rational, the emotional, the sensory, the intuitive, etc., is there a particular cluster or energetic quality that you consider to be the most important in the transformation that you're speaking about?
Yeah, I had a very quick response came forward when you were asking your question. Willingness. Everything else is a tool, but how we come to something, that willingness to be curious, the willingness to learn, the willingness to become, to stay in motion, to be listening. Anything that has a softness, like we have to have a softness to our edges so that things can travel into us. And if we're not open and willing, it's so subtle, it's an internal shift. So therein lies the challenge, right? Because if someone is already being abusive or violent or causing damage and harm to others, they're already at a stage where they're not able to feel sensitively. They've already gone to a far extreme. And I honestly think that's where we need to do interventions, because they're not capable of that shift. But the shift is available when we come to it with love, with the love and curiosity. And I think there is a tipping point. Because consciousness is collective, we don't all have to get there. But I think those of us that are in motion in that way, feeling love, feeling the pain in Ukraine, because we feel our connection sensorially, emotionally, liminally, then that will be enough. And I don't know what the number is. I don't know if there's a number. People, Roger Hallam, for instance, who, I worked with in Extinction Rebellion, who you've had here. He started with this premise that there's a number. And when we hit that number of people being arrested, for instance, then automatically it will kick off the next stages. And I'm not sure that life is that mechanical. I think it's more exponential because it's a living system. Living systems are by nature unpredictable, right? You push something here, you're not sure what's going to happen over there.
Yeah, all of us are living under the law of unintended consequences. Ukraine is an example, actually. You can have a critical mass of people embracing democracy and inclusion into the European Union, etc. And then some overarching force can drop on your head, independent of your intention. So it's very important, I think, for all of us to honor the complexities that are involved in all this. It's not so simple. Even the notion of willingness, if you remember Plato's allegory of the cave, where we're all in shackles and we're looking to the back of the cave and we see the shadows on the wall. What we realize after we've woken up is that, for the most part, according to Plato, our willingness to change is often induced by a trauma.
Yes.
Very few of us proactively, willingly go on the path that you're talking about. Some accident or death or disease, some kind of trauma kind of jolts us out of what it is that we're being gripped by. So the dynamic emergence is a very, very complex process.
That's why I mapped it out. It's like, I need help. I need to understand what on earth's going on here. There's too much energy and no one's talking about it. Even as a very young child, if my parents had a drinks party, for instance, and so their friends would come, and we lived in a nice big house, and everyone would dress up in cocktail dresses. And as a child, we'd get given little hors d'oeuvres to walk around and offer people. And I remember constantly being confused by the dissonance, the cognitive dissonance, if you will, between their appearance and their sound. They sounded loud, laughing. I'm having fun, but I felt grief. I didn't have words for that yet because I was still too young. But it made me an observer, actually. Things like that turned me into an observer. And I was lucky too, because I had the forest right there. I grew up with thousands of acres of forest, at the end of my street. So I just went and did that. I just went and hung out with the trees and the ecosystems, and also the sea. So I'm open. I'm already open, and I think those of us that are already open, that is our responsibility, is to step into unsafe or uncomfortable truthing. Like Greta Thunberg, she just did it. She didn't do it for glory. She did it because it was an impulse. And I think we have impulses. Rumi talks about these whispers, and Rilke, I think, also. We have these whispers. We have things we're hesitating to do, things we're waiting for a better time to do, like based on some kind of external criteria. But the fact is, if we're here today in this meeting, we have something to do. And it is up to us to acknowledge that, to see that energy waiting to be noticed, because when we release that, we become ourselves. So it takes courage, which is one of the words on my writing wall. And courage I saw in a different way the other day. Courage, right? Cour, heart, rage, which is very different from anger. Rage is an action. Rage is restoration. It is the lioness protecting her cubs. It is people protecting their land. And when I say their land, it's really the land that they belong to, not that they own. I think this idea that we have as humans that we can own things is very odd, but I think it comes back to this idea of Fernweh and Sehnsucht. We're like stealing stuff. We steal cow's milk. We don't ask. We just make an assumption. you know, and I drink cow's milk, so I'm part of it. I'm part of this system. You're muted, Jim.
I think that's true. We're all in it, and we're all trying to both understand it and get out of it. So I appreciate your humility and your willingness to live in the questions that are very urgently necessary for all of us to take up.
Yes.
And I would bring in just one aspect just for your comment as we close, and that is the zeitgeist. I think there's something in not only us as individuals and in our communities. I think that there's an awareness, a knowing, an alignment that's happening at the level of our collective interactivity. That when one individual resonates with the larger zeitgeist, you have events like in the Ukraine, where the whole world now is standing up in solidarity with the Ukraine, almost in unison and instantaneously. Because what is happening in the Ukraine is a microcosm in many ways of every person's struggle, wherever they are around the world, for freedom, for dignity, for truth, for community, and for sovereignty. So when sometimes events happens like George Floyd, many Black people have been killed, but for some reason, his death struck a chord all over the world.
Yeah.
And it's in those times that I think transformation becomes the most both urgent, but also the most possible. I mean, what do you think of that?
Well, I'm going to tell you something that I came across not so long ago that really excited me, and it's actually to do with physics. For a start, just immediately to mention George Floyd, it was the utter casualness, the blatant visibility of the disregard of his life, I think, that was the tipping point for people at the end of just too many years of cruelty and disregard. But I'm just going to mention solitons, which is spelled SOLITONS, because I was wondering, why do some ideas travel and others not? Like, of course it has something to do with timing. And also astronomy. But that's not my area of expertise. But anyway, here's the thing. So when energy moves through water, it can move through any medium, but I'm going to use water as an example. Energy moves through water. And normally what happens is called equipartition, which means that it spreads itself out evenly. And that's why waves kind of just dissipate, right? But one day, and I think his name was John Russell, who was an engineer, he was cycling next to a canal. And he noticed a barge or a canal boat going along this narrow riverway. And there was a wave that, instead of, like, if you looking at aerial view, like the waves normally go this way, like the boat's going this way, and then the waves, it breaks the waves, right? And we see the waves and they go and they dissipate. Once in a while, there's a wave called a soliton. And instead of breaking away and dissipating, equipartition, it actually travels in front of the boat. And I have a little video clip of it where this wave, this soliton, this solitary wave, travels through the other waves and maintains itself. It goes past everything. And what it does is it merges with the smaller waves and passes through. So it merges and then carries on without getting smaller. I see this as the physics of how evolution happens, of how an idea travels, of how memes become, of how George Floyd became a movement, Black Lives Matter, Me Too. All these movements are solitons, and they occur with certain conditions, certain physics conditions, one of which is depth. I think when we feel and understand something sensorially, and it can inform our rational, it can inform our emotional, empathic connection, that, and by the way, there is no resistance. This is very Bucky Fuller, because this wave is not saying to the other wave, I'm better than you, or you suck as a wave, look at me. It's not trying to convince this other wave to become like it. It just travels through it. And this is what we need to be doing, is keeping our visualizations focused on outcomes, meaning beautiful, harmonious, life-enhancing, restorative systems of behavior and love. And that those solitons are an available option to us. And I think it comes with that collectivity. And I think that's what we experience as a tipping point. So the idea that there is, in fact, a physics to an idea, to a birth of a movement, is so exciting to me. I love the symmetry of the universe, how it expresses itself verbally as well as visually and everything else. Does that help? That's an answer.
Thank you for introducing us to the notion of the soliton. So
I call it the soliton zone.
Yeah, that's a good note with which to close, everyone. We should all be solitons. Instead of ripples going back, we should be going forward. And that's what history is now calling upon all of us to achieve. So I want to thank you, Claire. This has been a marvelous session. And just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, everyone, sometimes it's hard to see what the connection is between dynamic emergence and the chaos and carnage and crises that we witness every day on our news media, the latest of which is the Ukraine, of course. But as I indicated, is to the degree to which we can engage in the dynamic emergence, which is the metaphor that we've explored today, in our own psyche and cells and souls and hearts and bodies and minds. That's the degree that we can handle the information that's coming in from the outside in. We have to be moving in our interior with as much dynamism from the inside out as from the outside in, or else we can be blown away and lose track and be caught in centrifugal forces that can be very, very destructive. So sometimes with all the news, it seems like humanity rising may be seemingly disconnected from all that, but it's actually deeply connected with the world by focusing our attention on our interior at a time when it's going to be our interior equilibrium, both individually and collectively and in community, that's going to determine our capacity to make the changes we all need or called for. So I wanted to just say that in closing. You're all now welcome to join Claire and others in the after chat. You'll see the link. Stan has just put it in the chat box. Claire, thank you so much.
Thank you too.
And tomorrow, everyone, we're going to turn to the Muslim world and find out what some Muslims are doing about climate change. It's very interesting to see what another part of the world is doing about a critical issue that affects us all. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye
you,
for now.
everybody.
See you
Bye
tomorrow.
for now.